Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the Mueller report was supposed to be the end-all, be-all, the great groundswell of support for impeachment, ensuring that Americans would want to tar and feather the president, run him out of Washington on a rail, deprive the American people of the president that they duly elected. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case. So then, it was all about bringing the Attorney General in, Bill Barr. He was certainly going to point out the inconsistencies and flaws in the analysis. Well, that didn't happen because the majority wanted to insist that their unelected staff ask questions of the Attorney General of the United States. But no, they said, we'll go to court, we'll win, we'll force Bill Barr and Don McGahn to come and testify. They're not winning in court. They're not here. It's a joke. For the last 4 months, the path the majority has taken us on has rambled from disorganized to just downright dizzying. In June, Speaker Pelosi said the House Democratic Caucus was, and I'm quoting, not even close to an impeachment inquiry. That was to CNN. In July, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler said, quote, an impeachment inquiry is when you consider only impeachment. That's not what we're doing. We're investigating all of this. But then in August, in a CNN interview, Nadler said, this is a formal impeachment proceeding. Then in September, when asked if the Democrats are engaged in an impeachment inquiry, the House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer answered, no. It was the gentlelady from Washington who said just recently, Ms. Jayapal, we have been in the midst of an impeachment investigation. She said that to Politico. But then in the very same story, the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes, said, no, we're not in an impeachment investigation. Then the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gregory Meeks, said, when asked if the House was investigating impeachment, he said, well, maybe we don't know whether an impeachment investigation has begun. It's just dizzying. Last week, it was the Judiciary Chairman, Jerry Nadler, who said, what we're doing is very clear. It's been very clear. It continues to be very clear. The Speaker has backed us at every point along the way. This process has been about as clear as Joe Biden's last answer to race relations that involved turning on the record player. We don't know where we are or what we're doing. Now, Mr. Lewandowski, I am not allowed by House rules to impugn the motives of my colleagues or to speculate as to what might be animating this bizarre circumstance. But those rules don't apply to you. So, Mr. Lewandowski, do you have a thought as to why we continue to engage in a charade that is overwhelmingly opposed by the American people and fundamentally misunderstood by my Democrat colleagues?
You know, Congressman, I think they hate this president more than they love their country.
Mr. Lewandowski, you were the campaign manager for the president's campaign when the Obama-Biden administration was notified that there might be efforts by the Russians to interfere with our election. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And can you describe for us the briefing you got as the campaign manager to ensure that our system was resilient and American democracy was protected?
There was no briefing provided by anybody from the Obama-Biden administration, members of the intelligence community, or the FBI to our campaign when I was present, or during my tenure as the campaign manager.
I mean, that's just baffling to me. I mean, our democracy is so precious. We have to cherish it. We have to protect it. And yet, when the Obama-Biden administration knew that there might be nefarious efforts to interfere or co-opt or in any way disturb our democracy, they didn't say anything to you. Now, as you sit here today, having watched these facts unfold, do you have any rationale as to why maybe the Clapper, Brennan, Comey, Obama, Biden team didn't want to give the Trump campaign a fair defensive briefing about the threats that we were facing?
It's actually unfathomable to me that they didn't contact the major political nominee for President of the United States and inform them of potential threats against the election process in 2016.
And we could be finding that out now. I mean, we could have those people before our committee to figure out what in the world happened that didn't allow us to get those answers. One final question for you, Mr. Lewandowski. Has an inspector general employed by the United States government ever accused you of breaking the law?
No.
No. but they have done that with James Comey, and yet the leadership of this committee will not bring James Comey before, even though the Inspector General said that his work impaired the credibility and efforts of over 35,000 FBI agents and the brave people fighting for our country. It's a shame that you're here, Mr. Lewandowski. Jim Comey should be sitting in that chair. He should be answering questions about why he did so much damage to the FBI in our country, including not giving you the briefing that you were entitled to. I yield back. Page stated, Trump's not ever going to be president, right? Right. Strzok replied, no, he's not. We'll stop it. Also in the Inspector General's report, there's someone identified as attorney number 2. Attorney number 2, this is page 419, replied, hell no, and then added, viva la resistance. Attorney number 2 in the Inspector General's report and Strzok both worked on your team, didn't they?
Pardon me? Can you ask?
They both worked on your team, didn't they?
I know. I heard Strzok. Who else were you talking about?
Attorney number 2 identified in the Inspector General's report.
Okay. And the question was?
Did he work for you? The guy who said viva la resistance.
Peter Strzok worked for me for a period of time, yes.
Yeah, but so did the other guy that said viva la resistance. And here's what I'm kind of noticing, Director Mueller. When people associated with Trump lied, you threw the book at him. When Christopher Steele lied, nothing. And so it seems to be that when Glenn Simpson met with Russians, nothing. When the Trump campaign met with Russians, 3,500 words. And maybe the reason why there are this discrepancies in what you focused on is because the team was so biased.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Pledged to stop Trump.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the transcript has now been released in the phone conversation between President Trump and President Zelensky. And the evidence is clear, unfortunately, that the Speaker of the House of Representatives has been functionally catfished into a politically fatal impeachment proceeding based on rumors, based on faulty evidence, and based on a bloodlust for the president politically that does not serve our nation well. Let me give you the high points. There is no quid pro quo between President Trump and President Zelensky for anything, much less military aid. There is no 8 times a reference to Joe Biden. I think the Wall Street Journal will have a good deal of retracting to do today. And in fact, President Zelensky himself identifies the rooting out of corruption as the reason for his election. Early on in the conversation between President Trump and President Zelensky says, we here in the Ukraine are trying to drain the swamp, much in the way you are working to drain the swamp in the United States of America. This wasn't a call about leverage. This wasn't a call about threats. This was a mutually appreciative and mutually laudatory call between two leaders who are trying to clean up some of the garbage in their respective countries that is polluted politics. Now, the president does ask for a favor from President Zelensky, but the favor is on behalf of our nation. The favor we seek is cooperation between the Zelensky government and Attorney General Bill Barr as we work to determine what activities in the Ukraine may have been in any way involved in the 2016, not 2020, but in the 2016 efforts to interfere with the United States election. The president even references CrowdStrike, attempting to get to the bottom of these improper actions, which again may have emanated in the Ukraine, and John Solomon with The Hill has got a great deal of reporting on that very question. Zelensky ran against corruption. And thus it would be only appropriate that in a conversation about that election victory, they would discuss and reference what are obviously mutual goals between the United States and the Ukraine to have the world safer for democracy. Now, the president also mentions Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And let me be clear about this. Mayor Giuliani has every right to go to the Ukraine and try to ascertain whether or not activities in that country were harming his client as a result of the corrupt connections which may have existed between the DNC and some elements in Ukraine. I feel like we've been here before. House Democrats told us it was all about collusion. We had to wait for the Mueller report. Well, when the Mueller report falls flat on collusion, then it's all about obstruction of justice. Until Robert Mueller comes and testifies, and that falls flat, then it's all about abuse of power. Until the Democrats go to court and are unable to make the case in court that there's been an abuse of power. And now, lo and behold, it's all about the Ukraine. Well, you know what? I saw this movie as it related to Russia. I didn't like it very much, and I doubt I'm going to enjoy the cheap Ukrainian knockoff. The Speaker has embraced these concerns, and I fear that her embrace of impeachment does great damage to the House of Representatives, because there may be a time where we have to solemnly exercise our impeachment powers because there is true crime or corruption and the Speaker's actions have embarrassed the United States Congress and they harm our entire country. President Zelensky, in this call, indicates that he will conduct an investigation into corruption. It's a promise not only that he made to President Trump, but that he made to his own citizens. And in that promise, President Zelensky says that any investigation will be both open and candid. Open and candid investigations of corruption, of election meddling. I sure would like to see that level of candidness and openness in our House of Representatives, and certainly my greatest hope is that the Attorney General's investigation into the corrupt origins of the efforts to smear the President of the United States will be exposed, and those responsible will go to jail. That is how we restore honor to this House. That is how we solve some of the great and heal some of the great wounds that were inflicted on this body by the Speaker yesterday. Maybe next time the radical left will wait for the facts before engaging in a reflexive, fact-free impeachment. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Capter, for 5 minutes.